I'd like to call to order the meeting. Ms. Fitzpatrick, can you please call the roll?
Yes, Trustee Anderson. Trustee Anderson. Oh, where did he go?
He left the meeting. There was a brief textual notice of that I saw.
All right, we'll come back to him. He's trying to get back in. Trustee Bauerlein.
Here.
Trustee Carp.
Here.
Trustee Keenan.
Here.
Trustee Kessler.
Present.
Trustee Reed.
Here.
Trustee Rufo.
Here.
Trustee Spalding.
Here.
Chair Jinks. And Vice Chair Cristaldi.
Here.
And Trustee Anderson has joined us back again as well.
Here.
Thank
Sorry.
you.
Thank you, Trustee Anderson.
Quorum is present, Madam Chair.
Okay, before we, we've been, quorum is present and the meeting has been publicly noticed, correct?
Yes.
Okay, just at the outset, I am going to table agenda item number 5, the student housing item, until a future meeting. That item is still being negotiated, so I know we had some people sign up for public comment, but today we are not going to, as a board, address that item that was previously noticed. I now call for public comment. We are moving into the public comment process of the meeting. It's New College's policy that if you wanted to speak at this meeting, you must have registered at least 48 hours in advance of the meeting. We had a list of 26 people who registered for public comment. Each commenter will have 1 minute to speak. Ms. Fitzpatrick will call your name. You will be unmuted, and at the 1 minute mark, you will be muted. Christy, before you call the first name, I would just ask everybody to abide by the time limits we have. Please keep your comments civil, and we will go from there. So please call the first commenter.
Yes, first up we have Shannon Ingalls. And for the participants, as a reminder, in the commenters, we will unmute you. You'll have a minute to make your comments, and then you'll be remuted at the end of the minute.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am, go ahead.
Okay. New College has become the butt of a Florida man joke. And to the students you forced out for exercising their freedom of speech, and the female students you're allowing to be groped by your new athletes, it's not very funny. Yes, we know about the record number of Title IX complaints. This is what we were afraid of. How long do you think you can keep this from the national press? Trustee Jinks, as the only female DeSantis appointee, I'd like to hear you actually say something about the slew of sexual assault complaints this semester and ask for an inquiry into how Corcoran is allowing Jimenez to haphazardly recruit athletes from God knows where, with who knows what kind of record, before voting to approve of this absurd salary. If you're okay with more sexual assault, if you're okay with more sexual assault, if that means the campus is more conservative, is this the culture change you wanted? Rape culture? Grooming? If you vote to approve a higher salary without an inquiry, the message will be clear. It would be as on brand as Rufo making comments about female students' breasts on Twitter. Your son.
Next up, we have Caroline.
Sure. If I can just comment, I know this is out of the ordinary, but as counsel, the only sexual harassment complaint I'm aware of is from years back under the former administration. So unless there's something I haven't been made aware of, which I would be in shock if I haven't, there are no pending current sexual harassment complaints.
Counsel, that's my understanding as well.
Okay, next up, we have Caroline Howerman.
I'm not seeing that attendee in the list.
Okay, next up, then we have Eliana Salazar. Do you see her, Ben? Okay, go ahead, Aliana.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm a parent of a new college student. I'm not here to complain today. I'm actually here to congratulate Richard Corcoran. Congratulations on breaking something beautiful. Congratulations on tanking New College national ranking nearly 25 spots. Congrats on driving away almost 40% of exceptional faculty. Congrats on accomplishing the enrollment miracle of a record-breaking class at Hampshire College. Congrats on giving every mediocre high school athlete the chance to play college ball and giving them a full free ride to do it. Congratulations on fleecing Florida taxpayers out of millions of dollars to give jobs to your family, your friends, your coaches, anyone but a qualified academic. Congrats on giving hope to every mediocre white man in America that despite having no academic background, no expertise in higher education, no personality, no people skills, that you can become someday $1 million dean of the smallest public college in Florida. And like every train wreck, untalented reality star, congrats on a second season and being renewed for a second season of this train wreck.
Okay, next up, we have Robin Williams.
In what public higher education universe does a college 1/4 the size of many American high schools have a top administrator making close to 1.12 million? In what world of accountability does somebody help choose himself interim president and then get rewarded being president while presiding over New College's precipitous 24-place drop in national rank in less than 10 months, seeing more than 1/3 of the faculty leave after one semester? Courses no longer able to be taught, admitting less qualified students, the lowest retention rate in the college's history, and losing 27% of its total students, more than twice the norm in 1 year. In any normal sphere, academic or otherwise, the honcho in chief would be canned. Only into Satanland is such abject failure royally remunerated out of the public till. Board of Trustees, you're a collective disgrace, a shanda. You run New College like the mob, student intimidation and all. Shame, 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 shame.
Next up, we have Rodrigo Diaz.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. Chair Deborah Jenks, during the most recent meeting of the board, the minutes from the August 10th meeting had to be amended because they misstated Trustee Rufo's motion to eliminate gender studies. Also, Trustee Cristaldi explained a vote he took on a measure by saying, quote, "I don't understand what we're doing," close quote. In light of this, I repeat 3 suggestions I have made previously. First, any motion or amendment before the board should be written, not just stated verbally. Second, all motions and amendments should be read aloud by the trustee making the motion or amendment prior to a vote. And third, all motions and amendments approved by the board should be recorded in the minutes exactly as they were written and read aloud. Thank you.
Next up, we have Gary Howe.
I don't see an attendee with that name.
Okay, next up then we have Hannah Palmer.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Hannah.
I direct my comment to the people of Florida. This board claims that Richard Corcoran deserves an astronomical compensation package due to his leadership skills. I'm in the leadership block of a medical education master's program at Penn with instruction from Penn, Wharton, and Harvard professors. We are learning about good and bad academic leadership. Good academic leadership includes collaboration with all stakeholders, not just dictating from on high. It includes getting to know your community and cultivating trust, transparency, respect, engagement, and a clear shared vision. I have seen none of these leadership qualities from Richard Corcoran. His actions are consistent with bad leadership traits: self-promoting, hypocritical, failing to take responsibility, opaque, arrogant, toxic, hostile, authoritarian, disrespectful, and incompetent. Is that the kind of leadership that Floridians want to reward or entrust with the education of their young people?
Okay, next up, we've got Miranda Pierce. Miranda.
No, not seeing Miranda.
Next up, we have Michael Sanderson.
Hi. My name is Mike Sanderson. I entered New College in 1999. And in 2001, I saw the state university system reorganized to dismantle the Board of Regents and create these boards of trustees, local boards of trustees, quote unquote. And getting politicians like Richard Corcoran huge salaries when they leave the legislature and prestigious presidential jobs in universities was always the point, which is why voters created the Board of Governors by a 21-point margin, but that's another story. The story today is the money, and personally, I don't care about the money, but you're paying all this to get what? For your plan to revive classical education, you're getting a flagship course in the Odyssey, which I and many other people read in middle school, and more data-driven. The accountability plan lowers the targets for the fall 23 entering class. He doesn't expect this class to stay at a higher rate than the students he's driving away. You are trustees. I expect you to at least make sure it doesn't embarrass us. Thank you.
Okay, next up, we have Elizabeth Braden.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
This week, a recent New College grad went to the UN to speak about how New College students fear retaliation and expulsion just for speaking out. A New College vice president was told by Corcoran not to care about unity on campus or school morale and was fired. 8 months ago, the trustees hired Corky as their interim president with no educational experience and doubled the salary to $700,000. Meanwhile, Corcoran is currently under federal investigation for a no-bid contract when he was educational commissioner. At New College, under Corky's rule, 40% of the faculty quit. Student dropout rate spikes. Retention rate falls. U.S. World and Report college ranking drops 24 spots. Failing big pays. After all this, he got a permanent job and they increased his pay by another $400,000. Heck of a job, Corky. Takes taxpayer beware. Sorry, Jenks, you have to listen to these.
Next up, we have Barry Sotero.
Hey, this is Barry Sotero. Some of you may know me as Barack Hussein Obama, my name.
Next up, we have Sam Sharp.
Sam, you're unmuted.
Hey, this is Sam, and let me mute. Sorry. Last meeting, my friend was trying to speak and did not get their free speech was suppressed, so he would like to speak now. Alex, come here.
My name is Alex Jones, and I use he, him pronouns.
Okay, next up we have Georgie Walker.
I'm not seeing that participant.
Okay. Next up we have Ben Shapiro.
Hello. Let's say hypothetically speaking that you did in fact mute Alexander Jones in a way that I thought was suppressing his freedom of speech. Now I tell you, I live in Nashville, Tennessee. I work for the Daily Wire, and I have to say to the people that I am going to disrespect my Judeo-Christian values and come out as a homosexual.
Okay. Next we have Cynthia.
I'm not seeing that participant.
Next up we have Carol Lerner.
I'm not seeing that participant.
Okay, next up then we have Donna Miller.
Jono, you're unmuted.
Okay, I'm John O'Miller. The clock's not starting here. Okay, John O'Miller, I was told in June that the college was updating the regulation dealing with master planning. All the college had to do was replace the word space committee with campus development committee. But instead of updating the college's regulation, it is now proposed for elimination. There's no need for that. None of the college's regulation was contrary to the mandates of the Board of Governors of the state's campus master plan statute. You're never going to have a great liberal arts college if the people who live, work, and study here feel as though they're not being consulted regarding their future. Not only that, but you're starving the college's future of the insights and vision of the people who know it best. Eliminating this regulation is a step backward in terms of shared governance and student agency. And I'll just add that items like this should never be on a consent agenda. Thank you.
Next up, we have Lisa Scher.
I'm not seeing that user.
Okay, next we have Juliana Terry Balvo.
Am I unmuted?
Yes, go ahead.
I'm Juliana Pare-Blagoyev, New College alumna. One performance goal in Mr. Corcoran's proposed contract is to increase funding for New College. Because his compensation package far exceeds what can be paid through public funds, Mr. Corcoran will need to increase the fundraising in a way that potentially benefits him personally. This creates a potential conflict of interest such that Mr. Corcoran will be in the position of making a difficult choice. Every time he fundraises, is he doing it for his own benefit or the college's benefit? This potential conflict of interest in his contract should be addressed before the contract can be voted upon. One possibility would be to draft a section that indicates Mr. Corcoran can only fundraise for himself after he has fundraised an amount for the school that is proportionally greater than what prior leadership has raised in an amount that reflects the proportionally larger salary and benefits that he is being provided. Thank you for your prompt attention to this concern. I know that we all want to avoid any possible indication of moral breaches.
Okay, next up we have Matthew Walsh.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm worried about the gender insanity in our school, and I want to thank President Corcoran for helping all the students understand the difference between men and women by fixing the bathroom signs. I still don't know what a woman is supposed to be. Is it supposed to be a female, a man who feels like a female? And the social contagion is causing harm to all the children there. cutting all their body parts off and
Next up, we have Marcus Alves.
Hi, it's Margot. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
As the presidential contract is not available for review, I will need to go on a hunch here. If it is anything like the interim contract, we can rest assured that Corcoran will be flagrantly overpaid. The proposed $1.5 million salary package is an absurd waste of taxpayer money. As a small liberal arts college with the lowest student population in the state, how can this type of taxpayer abuse be tolerated? What attributes does Corcoran hold that justify this tremendous amount of money? It is not his respect for students and faculty. It is not his transparency. It is not his ability to run a college. He is self-serving, disrespectful, and a slap in the face to the previous presidents of the university. The assertion that Corcoran deserves this gross overpayment is laughable and an insult not only to New College, but Florida taxpayers. I know my remarks make no difference to those on this board who are in favor of his salary, but your disgusting greed and ineptitude will be remembered.
Thank you. Next up, we have David Daigle.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
All right. That we were subjected to. Those are the words that led my daughter to leave New College. It seems odd to say that my wife and I were relieved when our daughter finally made the difficult decision to leave the school that once provided an environment in which she thrived, but that's the reality. In 2022, my Nova entered New College under a wonderful and welcoming president. This year, my daughter and her fellow students were shown that they would be subjected to targeted attacks by grifting, corrupt, bigoted, and unqualified president, administration, board of trustees if they exercise their First Amendment rights and show that they are not mission aligned. What parent would want their child at a college run by politicians that intentionally damage the lives of students to score political points? One doesn't need to be woke to see the assaults on decency and educational freedom happening here. If allowed to continue, this is an assault that will damage Florida and the nation.
Okay, next up is Elizabeth Alves.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
True to form, the contract was posted late, which will not stop me from making comments, and nobody expects the board members to actually review the contract before voting on it this time either. The proposed range of up to $1.3 million to run a small liberal arts college is nothing less than shocking. The blatant abuse of taxpayer dollars is preposterous. Every board member voting yes implicates him or herself in the process. Mr. Cristaldi, you can't have it both ways. Presidential Search Committee Chair Spalding previously explained to us that a total salary package of $1.5 million would be necessary to attract the right caliber of candidate, only to shortlist a candidate who was runner-up to Patricia Oker, who would have happily accepted the job for $360,000. Mr. Spalding, you did tell us you were a good friend of Mr. Corcoran's. Maybe that explains your largesse at the taxpayer's expense.
Next up, we have Gabriel Jochum.
I'm not seeing that attendee.
Okay, next up, then we have Kathleen Cody.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
I'm Kathleen Cody, Charter Class Alum 1964. I would like to ask for a few moments of silence to honor the dead, wounded, and the hostages in the Middle East. The world is in a very dangerous place. We need all the unity we can summon to fight the forces of evil. I call on Mr. Corcoran to use his role as president of this college to unite us all. I call on him to meet with the groups that have disagreed with him, to truly listen to our concerns and fears. There is no greater role for a leader than to unite, to be that trusted person that holds to the ideals of New College. Honesty, justice, fairness, kindness, and free speech are what we stand for. The divisiveness must end, and I, for one, am open to civil discourse to repair the immense damage that has occurred. I ask Mr. Corcoran to set up a roundtable of stakeholders and to hold weekly meetings to support the true mission of the small but mighty college.
Thank you. And our last public commenter today is Jen Albez.
Well, is that Elizabeth Albiez?
No, this is another person. I'm not seeing that on here. So, Madam Chair, that concludes our public comment this morning.
Thank you. If you can, thank you. I would just note that one of the commenters, Gary Howell, did send in his comments by email, which was received. So thank you, everybody. That concludes the public comment portion of our meeting. And at this point, I'd like to move into the consent agenda. I would ask to have a motion to approve the action items on the consent agenda. Can I have a motion to approve the consent agenda? You're muted, Matthew Spalding.
So moved.
I actually,
Second.
I would like to
Madam
pull
Chair,
one item.
Madam Chair, trustee.
Okay. So what we're gonna do is, I see your hand, trustee Reed. We've had a motion to approve the consent agenda. We've had a second. And now we're gonna go into discussion and I will recognize you. What is it that you want pulled off of the consent?
The item on the campus master plan, please.
Okay, so we will take that up as a separate action item, no problem. Subject to removing from the consent agenda the campus master plan item. Do we have approval for the motion to approve the consent agenda? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Any opposed? No, thank you. All right, we'll take up as a separate matter the campus master plan, and would we please have Attorney Brickhouse, you're going to cover that?
Yes, Madam Chair. So before the board, we have a strike all amendment to the campus master planning regulation of New College of Florida. We were the only SUS institution that had a campus master plan regulation. And so this amendment is to strike that rather than to undertake a complete overhaul to bring us into compliance with what the statutory and Board of Governors regulation requirements are, which are lengthy. There's specific sequence of committees and public hearings that have to be held. And so this will allow us to adopt the same model as our sister institutions and to be able to utilize just the structure that we're already required to fulfill under the statute and Board of Governors regulations.
Okay, I'm sorry, I see a hand raised. It was Trustee Keenan's hand came up first. Trustee Spalding, then we'll move to you. Trustee Keenan, you're recognized.
Thank you. So I had a few questions. So when I read the Board of Governors regulations, it seemed kind of clear to me that we're still allowed to have regulations like this within our own. It was 2021C that specifically says that the Board of Governors says that Board of Trustees can adopt their regulations. So if it says that we can do that, why is this out of compliance?
It's a good question, Trustee Keenan. And so the way that we undertake the master planning regulation is we don't want to have a regulation that excludes required steps, because then you could have instances where either the public or staff look to our regulation, which is then not dispositive. You're missing elements that are required under the law, and that's not good practice to have as part of your regulatory scheme. And so this allows us to utilize the existing framework that every other institution in SUS follows. It also prevents issues where if there's a statutory amendment or a Board of Governors amendment, we don't have to continuously curate multiple sections of statutes and Board of Governors regulations by bringing this regulation back to you each time to make those amendments.
So does the BOG regulation still require that the master plan still has to come to the Board of Trustees for approval?
Correct.
And does it include all of the steps of who is involved and what the whole process is? So there'll still be student input, staff input, community input. Those
Yes,
are required.
Yes, there's statutorily required sequence of public hearings, public notices that have to be held before it comes to the Board of Trustees for ultimate disposition.
Okay, thank you. I think I understand, but I still don't fully understand how this conflicts with the Board of Regulation, but thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Spalding, your hand went up next, and then Trustee Reed.
I think my the answer by the Keenan's inquiries there. And so I'd like to get some further clarification, because in your initial remarks, you said removing this, we would then fall back on existing regulations. So I would ask you to flesh those out more. I would assume the concern here is that we're not going to have a master plan, or somehow that's disappearing, or it's disappearing in a way where we won't have authority over it, or, you know, all of the above, right? That's the question. So, and obviously I think we should have a master plan, and something that comes to the board and is approved, and we're all in it together. But is this merely a kind of a process, bookkeeping, cleaning up the books, or is some substantive change going on here? What is this, removing this, what do we then fall back on in terms of regulations and how that process looks like? And like I said, Trustee Keenan already started down this path, but I'd like to actually hear some more to assure us and the board that the master plan process, which I think we would, as a fiduciary matter, are responsible to do, will still go forward.
Yes, Trustee Spalding, that's exactly correct. And this is what I would classify as a housekeeping amendment. And this is just to clear the books of our regulations, so that way there's no confusion as to the sequence of public notices, public hearings, and the process and statutory requirements that we're obligated to fulfill. And so this is actually making sure that everyone is aware that there's a very robust public process that's required of us, and that we will comply with.
So would it be fair to say that in a certain way, you're giving the New College Board of Trustees additional responsibility by removing what might be scheduling and process requirements regarding the BOG, such that we can do this through the normal process on our own?
Trustee Spalding,
am I mishearing you?
Trustee Spalding, if I may, we're not ceding anything to the BOG. We maintain our authority to master plan. We are just in an effort to be consistent with the more comprehensive process that's outlined in statute and under the BOG regs, that we comply with that. It's really just a best practice. And as Mr. Brickhouse mentioned, you know, we don't want to constantly be in a position where we're having to curate, as he says, or we find ourselves in a situation where we believe we've checked boxes, and then we are unable to be dispositive on what we've done because we're not in compliance with the BOG regs. But we have not seen any authority.
No, that sounds good. My concern is having a really great master plan. I'm more concerned with that than merely checking boxes. But because process sometimes can get in the way of having a master plan. But that sounds all very reasonable, and does not undermine that process at all. Sounds to me like might actually improve it. Thank you.
Trustee Reed.
So actually, I have questions that are following up on what Trustee Keenan and Trustee Spalding just raised. And I'm not so sure that I understand how eliminating this regulation actually improves things. So back in August, there was a discussion of the campus master plan at our meeting. And in the growth master plan, part of the business plan, it laid out a very vague set of steps for approval of the master plan, including very little time for any input from stakeholders on the campus or in the local community. And it said, a more detailed timeline is being developed. right? With a second public hearing in December, by December 1st. So I raised questions at that point. And actually, Trustee Spalding responded by saying that he was involved with the Committee for Strategic Planning for the BOT, and saying that they were going to be looking into this. So I'd actually like to hear, if I understand, this regulation abolishes the campus space committee. And I'm not sure I think that that's a good idea, given that we need a way for people on the campus to bring information up. And certain issues that have come up on campus, including the removal of artwork on campus, might have been avoided had those decisions gone through a campus space committee, as they had to be approved for installation. But if I can ask Trustee Spalding, has your strategic planning committee met? Are you involved in the master planning at this point? And what's the process for that going forward?
If I could interject, Chair Jenks.
Yes.
I'll say it again and again and again. A tremendous amount of that business plan, as I've said to you guys in the past, is aspirational. The hope was that if all things were wonderful and we could get moving as quickly as possible and we could follow all of the law regulations and the statutory regulations that are required of us, that would be aspirational to have move forward on a master plan by the December 1st that we put in to the aspirational components of the business plan. Obviously, that's 6 weeks away. And the reason we chose that date was because we thought that if we were able to do that, that would set us up nicely going into the legislative session with actual, a true vision to show to the legislatures and the executive about what we were trying to do. Obviously, we're not going to make that December 1st deadline. And again, that was an aspirational date put in there, hoping that we could move as quickly as possible. But to date, we have not done anything. We're working on it as quickly as we can, trustees. We haven't even laid out the timeline for the master plan. The second we can, we're going to do it as quickly as possible. We'll probably now obviously push into the new year. And we still hope that we'll be able to make very compelling arguments to the legislature asking for additional funds so that the process and the concept won't just be a discussion, it will be a reality.
Thank you. Vice Chair Cristaldi had his hand up. I think he had a point of information. Excuse me, Trustee Reed. I'm recognizing Vice Chair Cristaldi.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Madam Chair, I certainly trust your judgment on how best to manage the agenda. We're 44 minutes into a 2-hour meeting, and we have a very important agenda item to get through that I'm fearing might be rushed. So I was just going to suggest that this issue is also important and obviously warrants a little bit of discussion. Perhaps we table it until later in the meeting and move to other agenda items. But again, I will defer to your judgment, Madam Chair.
And I don't know, Trustee Reed, how many more questions you have. I mean, but if you have additional questions, I just want to emphasize that the other 11 SUS institutions, all other 11 SUS use the same process. And the space committee you referenced, are you aware of the last time it met?
I believe it's problematic that the space committee has not been meeting. Yes. I see that as a problem on campus, and I don't see that that's justification for getting rid of it.
Mr. President, Trustee.
But my question was for Trustee
Let me
Spalding.
tell you where we are. There's what I interpreted as a motion to table from Trustee Cristaldi. I can assure as counsel that there's no legal urgency to adopt this strike law. We are still governed by the BOG regulations and the statutory regulations and have to comply with them all. But unless I'm mistaken, Trustee Cristaldi, there's a motion to either table or postpone and take up at a later time, which is not debatable. And
so you broke up, which is not what?
It's not
debatable. So I'm okay with going ahead with the motion to table, but I'd like an answer to the question I asked beforehand, please, before we vote on that.
We have not formally met yet. I've been talking to Interim President Corcoran, and I very much look forward to meeting and working on a master plan. Something I'm very concerned and interested in, but we have not met yet.
Thank you.
Trustee Reed, no, I have not even met with staff on it. It's literally just been, unfortunately, with all of the items that we're dealing with, we have not gotten to where we would like to get on that, but hopefully we'll get a timeline as quickly as possible to you that would meet, and it would have all of the input from the stakeholders, input from the students, input from the faculty, public hearings, everything, in order for it to be the best liberal arts college and have the best master plan, we need to have the input and the time with all stakeholders, and we will absolutely do that.
Okay, again, unless there's an objection, there's been a motion to table and Madam Chair, can you adopt it? We're good.
If I may, counsel, I think if Dr. Reed, I think sounds like she's ready to vote. If that's the case, I think we could withdraw the motion and just have the vote.
No, I'm okay with tabling this. I'm not okay with approving this. I think Trustee Cristaldi's motion to table this is appropriate and welcome.
Yeah, Madam Chair.
Was the motion to table or to table to later in this meeting? Just postpone for a few moments.
So a motion to table can be taken back up and then.
But I think we're ready to vote.
So-
If Trustee Cristaldi was willing to withdraw.
Trustee Cristaldi, just restate your motion.
Yes, I was suggesting that either we table it till later in the meeting, time permitting, or that we call it to a vote, but that we focus our discussion time on other agenda items, which I think are important, and I am concerned that we would be rushed on.
Fine, I'll second the motion to table for purposes of this meeting. And we can take it up at the end, time permitting. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. So that motion has been carried. At this point, I am going to pass the gavel to everything else on the consent agenda has been approved. We'll come back to this time permitting. I'm going to pass the gavel now to Vice Chair Ron Cristaldi to open up the discussion of his work on the presidential contract. And with that, I'm giving you the gavel.
Thank
Vice
you,
Chair
Madam
Cristaldi, floor is yours.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Madam Chair. I thought it most appropriate to start with a little bit of context to make sure that this board all has the context in mind as we talk through the proposed contract. So just from a contextual perspective, on January 31st of this year, as the board will recall, this board approved the termination of the prior president, and on February 21st of this year, the board hired Mr. Corcoran as interim president and approved a contract for him. A presidential search committee was then formed, and it was chaired by Trustee Spalding. I had the pleasure of serving on that committee, and I had the pleasure of serving on the prior presidential search committee for our prior president. On July 6th of this year, the board received a presentation and data on presidential compensation prepared by a company called Mercer, which has extensive experience in executive compensation and is a subsidiary of the larger consulting firm, Marsh McLennan. At that meeting, on a motion of Trustee Kessler, the base salary and total compensation range for the president position was approved by this board. After the search committee completed its work on October 3rd, this board approved hiring President Corcoran as the president of New College of Florida, and Chair Jenks designated me to negotiate an employment agreement with Mr. Corcoran pursuant to Board of Governors regulations. Because this board previously approved an interim agreement with the president based on its judgment, I believed that it was the most appropriate place to begin. And so I began negotiations with Mr. Corcoran, starting with the interim agreement as a template. I do want to say that as an alum and certainly as a trustee, I took this responsibility very seriously. Those of you who know me know that I've served since January 1, 2020 on this board, and I am now on 3 years on my third president, unfortunately. And I do think that that lack of stability has hurt us as an institution. I did although I did start with that interim agreement as a contract, I did not presume that any provision of it was a fait accompli, and I looked at every provision of it with a critical eye. And I did feel like some things needed to be tightened, and I will go over a few of those things. Fundamentally, this contract is not about what we pay an individual, in my opinion. It's about how we achieve the goals of this institution through the hiring of a president, and how we align that president's goals and contractual terms with those goals and vision and objectives of the university. And in my mind, those things fundamentally fall in the areas of enriching the educational experience of our student body. Any university starts, and most fundamentally, with an enriched, engaged, healthy student body. It also deals with an engaged and highly qualified faculty. It necessitates transparent, accurate, and timely communication between the president and the board of trustees. In our case, it also necessitates positive student enrollment growth, because we are at a place that I believe is below critical mass for what this university needs to long-term succeed. And fundamentally, I believe that it was important to focus on long-term stability. We've had some discussion at this meeting about master planning. We have a strategic plan. We're undertaking significant renovations. We, at our last meeting, approved acquisition or negotiation for acquisition of 9 additional acres. We are trying to long-term increase the growth of the institution. There's no way that we will do that if we change presidents every 12 to 18 months. During the process, I had very extensive discussions and negotiations with President Corcoran. I will say we didn't always start at the same place. We didn't agree on everything. Again, those of you who know me know that I have my negotiation approaches, and they are fundamentally principled, and I start and stop where I think the right place to be is. But I will say that President Corcoran engaged in those negotiations in an extremely professional way, and in every single instance where we had areas where we did not start in the same place, we ended in a compromised position that was in the same place. And I found those negotiations to be pleasant and very productive. I also worked very closely with our general counsel, Mr. Galvano, in drafting the document. I'm going to ask him a little bit later in this discussion to speak to the negotiation process, his interactions with the Board of Governors Council, who has also signed off on this agreement, and I will ask him to speak to the legal sufficiency of the document. Trustee Spalding, not to put you on the spot, but in a little bit, I'd like to ask you to speak a little bit to the financial sufficiency of the document based on the Mercer report. And I do that to you, sir, because you chaired our search committee, worked very closely with Mercer, and have an understanding of those compensation metrics much greater than I think any of the rest of the trustees here. I will say that I took that aspect of this extremely seriously. I did receive emails and data from the public, but I will tell you that I spent a lot of time with Mercer, particularly an individual named Lynn Harper, who walked me through the documents and had quite a bit of discussion with me on the compensation ranges. Lynn is, I was convinced that she is a true expert in this area. She's worked on over 120 university salary projects, and the data and information she had access to was impressive. I was told by Ms. Harper that it is her professional opinion that the total compensation package and the cash compensation component of the agreement that's in front of you, in her opinion, is within the range of fair market value. I know there's been a lot of public comment about the size of our institution or the state of our institution. And I will submit to you all that I did not focus on where we are today. I focused on where our expectations are for our president, on where we need to be, where we want to be. And so we're not, some public comment about us being the size of a high school. With due respect to all the great high schools around the country, we're not a high school. We are the honors program of the state university system. And we aspire to be one of the top, if not the top, liberal arts institutions in the nation. And that's what we are setting as a goal. And that's what we're going to be asking of our president. And that was the litmus test for me on how we should approach these things. The financial provisions of the agreement are set forth in they're itemized in the item summary that was presented to the board, and certainly they're reflected in the draft contract. I don't think it's necessary to go through each and every one of them, but with few exceptions, the compensation in the agreement is largely the same as this group already approved in the interim agreement. Except for a few items that I'd like to kind of address why I may have deviated on them. The term of the agreement is for 5 years. In discussion with President Corcoran, we set the start date of the date that he started at New College, not today. So it goes back to February of this year, 5 years from there. As I indicated earlier, I fundamentally and wholeheartedly believe that in order to realize the potential of New College of Florida, in order to accomplish things like our master plan, in order to accomplish our strategic goals, we need to maintain stability in the role of president. Turnover, as any of us in the business world know and in the government world know, turnover is extremely costly. And given the fragile state of this university at this time, turnover at the president level could not only be costly, it can bring an end to this institution. I commend one of our public commenters who I don't know, but I think her name was Miss Cody, for talking about healing, coming together, and I think it is a time for that. But we're not going to accomplish that healing with instability or with changes at the present level. And so we must set this institution on that path, and we must do it through a stable environment. So for those reasons, I thought it fundamental in this contract to incentivize the president to remain the president during his entire term, and therefore negotiated into the contract a retention bonus mechanism that essentially accrues a $200,000 retention bonus on an annual basis for the first 3 years. It's paid after the third year, and $100,000 a year for the second two years. Actually, it's the fourth and fifth year. So the second phase of this, fourth and fifth year, that $200,000 collective payment would be paid after the fifth year. In addition, I felt it was very important to begin to articulate the criteria on which President Corcoran's incentive payments would be made. I talked about students, I talked about faculty, I talked about growing enrollment, increasing fundraising. All of those things are extremely important. And frankly, our interim agreement lacked these provisions. And so I negotiated in Section 8 of the proposed agreement in front of you a number of very specific criteria that the board could modify from time to time in consultation in agreement with President Corcoran, but that would very much more clearly articulate what our expectations were and how the incentive bonus would be paid. I added provisions that dealt with the hopefully non-existent but potential death or disability of our president that I found to be standard in other employment agreements for state university presidents in Florida. I did add a relocation allowance for the president because I believe it's important for the president to not live in Pasco County, although that's a wonderful area of our state, but it's important to be very close to campus. I did add a termination by New College on uncured breach of the president, which was lacking in our prior agreement. And our prior agreement only gave the ability to terminate on, quote, a deliberate and actual violation, which we still have the right to do that. But any material uncured breach would now give the right to terminate. I added provisions that the president serves at the pleasure of the Board of Trustees and reports to the Board of Trustees. And I know President Corcoran appreciated that and understood that before, but it was not expressed in the prior agreement. And I thought it important. And so before we open it up for discussion, I'd like to ask Trustee Spalding if he had a chance to review the draft agreement and the compensation provisions, and with his experience in having dealt with the Mercer report and worked closely with Lynn and her colleagues there. Trustee Spalding, if you have any thoughts or comments on how the compensation comports with the reasonableness of compensation as reflected in the Mercer report. And forgive me if you have no comment on that. I don't mean to put you on the spot. You're on mute.
Can you hear me?
There it is. Yep.
Yes.
I said, Trustee Castrelli, I'm a professor. I always have comments. Thank you. That was actually a very thoroughgoing report. I thank you for your work. I've been reviewing this, and I went back and actually I wanted to start by mentioning our presidential search criteria, which was another important document approved by this board, and underscore the conditions under which we are thinking through and making decisions and operating since the moment we began the process that Trustee Castrelli walked us through at the very beginning of his presentation. Which is to say that this is a very unique situation. In conducting the search, I was very impressed by all the candidates. I especially thought that Bob Gervasi was he's a great man and great. I love talking with him. But this is a different situation. This is not a normal situation. This is not a usual situation we find ourselves just looking for a president. And I just recall all of our conversations, at least from the first meeting I was here as a member of the Board of Trustees, about the situation which we find ourselves, which all other things being equal. And I believe this was a high likelihood before, and it was actually saved because of our legal counsel when he was in the Florida legislature. But all things being equal, this school should well have been closed. The numbers were dwindling, the financial situation, all of that looked terrible if you're looking at it from the point of view of a college. Colleges are extremely hard institutions to run. The moving parts are many, academic, facility, and otherwise. Fundraising being a major component of that, and here we found ourselves in that situation. This is what we can call a turnaround situation. I know some have, I think, wrongly criticized and wrongly understood what we're trying to do here. This isn't a hostile takeover. I really have. I've always, from the first meeting in which I responded to that, that is not the case. We're trying to not only save an institution which was in a very bad spot, but we're trying to restore it according to its mission as the Liberal Arts Honors College, as a college committed to non-discrimination. When I read its history, that's why I really fell in love with the place. So I just wanted to emphasize that, and I think the report from Mercer and all of my discussions with Mercer, especially Lynn, who I think is very impressive. If you look at go back and review the criteria, and then that Mercer report, it is, what we're looking for and what Mercer put together is trying the best we can to understand an extremely unique situation in which we are looking for someone that not only will uphold the mission and purpose of the college, which we would do under any circumstance, but someone who essentially will turn the ship against the winds and really seize this opportunity, which I think it is, to not merely keep it alive, but rebuild it into the great institution it ought to be. And I think Trustee Casoldi captured that in terms of we're hiring for not this moment, but what we want it to be. And we're looking for who's going to get us there, I think is the question. And this package, I think does it. I want to, on particulars, I'll point out a couple of things just based on my read of all this. Which I commend Trustee Casali, I commend your negotiating skills, because I'm sure that is an important aspect of this. The base salary is in the 46th percentile. The base and the bonus is in the 37th percentile. The base, the bonus, and all the other compensation is in the 38th percentile. This does not strike me as a radical deviation and a excuse to pump up a salary, but it strikes me as a very reasonable package. And that's even true for my rough calculations. If you remove the outlier institution, which a number of people pointed out in the original Mercer package. So that strikes me as right on the mark. The other thing I will point out and commend you for, because this was something I was very interested in throughout the Mercer discussion, and was emphasizing, is this idea of retention bonuses. There was a commentator who talked about a conflict of interest between one's salary and one's work, and it strikes me that's a misconception of how it actually operates, which is it's an incentive. That is, we are incentivizing someone to go out and do great things for the college, including raising a lot of money for the college. That's what a bonus is for. And to your point, the bonus keeps him here longer. We're investing in him because we're investing in the college. So I think that component is extremely important. And since you didn't mention the performance goals and incentive compensation in the contract, just encourage people to take a look at it. What is it? It's increasing fundraising. It's increasing campus life, inclusive of improvements to student housing, food services, sports, membership in the NAIA, campus master plan. Just it's there as a bonus to be incentivized. Security, safety and security, growth and excellence of faculty, doubling the size of the student body, academic programs and offerings, and increasing retention to 85%. This strikes me as the kind of package we actually not only need, but want to get us where we're going. So I think it's actually a very good package. And then one just last point I will make to everybody else, since we're going to now consider this, is for us to keep in mind our responsibilities, and particularly our fiduciary responsibilities, which is to the mission of this college, and from the people of Florida who want this and want to see this college restored to its excellence as the Honors College of Florida. And it strikes me that this is the kind of package that will do it. We want to go somewhere. We want to build something. And all the things we're interested in doing, I think, are captured in this. So again, I'll just end there and commend you for that. And also remind, based on that board responsibility, as a message to interim President Corcoran, hopefully soon to be President Corcoran, that we have put in here, which he already knows, but we now have formally put it in his contract, that the Board of Trustees makes all the final decisions, and he reports to us, and this is something we're in together, and we look forward to working with him and having him work for us to save and expand and rebuild this college. And again, this is a great package, and I commend you for that, Trustee Castaldi.
Thank you. So just in completing kind of the presentation here, I'd like to maybe also call on Mr. Galvano to speak a little bit on two fronts, on the interactions with the Board of Governors Council and the approval of the Board of Governors Council. Of course, this document will need to go to the Board of Governors for approval, but I'd like to ask you to speak to that, and also if you can just give some thoughts on the legal sufficiency of the document, because there are quite a few regulations that we need to comply with as we enter into this contract.
Yes, and let me start by saying thank you, Trustee Cristaldi. It's made my job a lot easier being a very talented lawyer that you are in putting this in your negotiations into this document. My first job is to internally cross-reference with the existing regulations and statutes that govern contracts such as this between a public university and its employment. I also sought some input from our HR counsel in putting this initial draft together. Under the regulations, and I think I mentioned this at the last meeting, the regs require that the Board of Governors General Counsel, in this case Rachel Mutzas, review the contract. So it was then transmitted to her for review. We did have several, I guess, conversations regarding the contracts and made some modifications based thereon. I also took an additional step, which is not required, and had discussions with the chancellor of the state university system. And I took these steps because there have been some recent modifications to the presidential search and appointment process as outlined in the BOG regs to make sure we were complying in particular with, you know, benchmarks and goals. And I can report to you that the BOG General Counsel has signed off on this contract for legal sufficiency. I have no further concerns or comments, so to speak, from the chancellor, and I believe you have a document before you that's legally balanced, but also more importantly, legally compliant.
Thank you. So in concluding the presentation, I believe what you have in front of you is a document that's based on the interim agreement, but adds provisions that clarify that the president serves at the pleasure of the board and reports to this board, that add the ability to the board to terminate this agreement if there's material uncured breach, that adds a level of specificity on the incentive bonusing criteria to include focus on faculty, focus on students, focus on growth, focus on fundraising, etc. And that significantly goes a long way in increasing the stability of the president position. Again, that doesn't mean that we can't terminate the president. It just means that if the president voluntarily leaves early, he loses that benefit. So with that being said, in order to open this up for discussion, and certainly I'd be willing to entertain questions, I think it's first appropriate to entertain a motion to adopt the employment agreement of President Corcoran as presented.
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Trustee Cart. Is there a second?
Second.
That was Trustee Kessler. Thank you, Trustee Kessler. I think now I'm happy to entertain any specific questions that any trustees have of me. And let me, I neglected to do this, but let me just ask President Corcoran if there was anything that you wanted to say, sir, before we get into questions and answers here. If not, that's okay as well.
No, I appreciate all your comments. I thought negotiating with you was a very honorable process. I thought you were very fair, and at all times, I felt that both of us were looking out for the long-term success of New College. And it's a great honor to serve you all, and I look forward to the years ahead, hopefully.
Thank you. Any questions or comments or discussion?
I had a few questions.
Yes, Trustee Keenan.
First off, thank you for the work you guys did for this contract. It looks very good. My first question has to do with, so we only received this when we started this meeting. It looked like we only got this contract 23 hours before the meeting. And from my understanding, the public can only make public comments if they submit, I think, 48 hours beforehand. So does that mean that the public was not able to see this and comment on it before we received it?
I can speak to the timing of it, and maybe Mr. Galvano can speak to the
Yeah,
public comment
I'll
aspect.
answer that.
Let me, if you don't mind, sorry, Mr. Galvano, if you don't mind, let me just make one prefatory comment about the timing, because it's an important question. So this group met on October 3rd, 17 days ago, and designated me that day to do this, which I honestly didn't have heads up on before that. The process included engagement with Mercer. It included Mr. Galvano's back and forth discussions with Bog Council. It included lots of meetings and discussions between me and Mr. Corcoran in a very short period of time. So I'll take some responsibility for that, but I will tell you all that the moment we got the sign off from Bog, we posted it and sent it out. There was no intention to delay everything. We just set the timing in a way that it made it a little bit difficult to get it out sort of a week in advance. Mr. Galvano, can you speak to the receipt of it by the public? If you know.
Yes, to your question, it's legally compliant. We had a agenda that identified the item that was going to be on the agenda, and folks could speak to it. So if you're asking whether it somehow creates a legal problem procedurally, the answer is no. Would it have been nice for them to have it earlier? Yes, but as you just heard, given the circumstances, it was very difficult.
And I don't know for sure, Trustee Keenan, but I haven't spoken to any press outlets, but I will tell you that I got at least one email last night with very specific questions on the contract from a reporter. So somebody in the public had it in advance of the meeting. I'm not sure though about the distribution.
Thank you. And so my next question is a part that I'm pretty confused about. So we signed the interim contract with Mr. Corcoran prior, but this contract starts at that same date, February 22nd, I believe. So what happens to the previous contract that we signed? Because this doesn't say anywhere that contract we're no longer following that previous contract.
So
yeah, so maybe I can take it and you can fill out the legal details. So it's another astute observation, an excellent question. My understanding is that his term of employment kind of relates back to the original, but the effective date of this contract is essentially when we approve it and sign it. And there's what's called a merger provision in the agreement, which merges all prior agreements into this agreement, so that effectively supersedes the other. But Mr. Galvano, I don't mean to keep speaking over you, sir. Why don't you clean up on that?
No, I work for you. No, you're exactly right. Is it Trustee Keenan, if you look at paragraph 21, it supersedes all previous agreements, and we effectively have what's called innovation.
Got it. Okay, thank you. And then my next question is financially. So we previously got a budget from the foundation that doesn't account for this salary. So do we have a number of how much more the foundation is going to have to raise to account for this salary? I think we still pay severance for Dr. Oker. Do we have a specific number of how much we're going to have to raise?
I can give you a ballpark number because just in doing the math in my head, I think that the fundamental difference in the two agreements, there may be some, like the relocation expense is a little bit different, but it's not a material number on the grand scale. I don't mean to downplay $18,000 because every dollar is important, but the most material amount is the retention bonus. And the first payment of that would be a $600,000 payment, but it's paid 3 years from now, or 3 years in. And so that would be something that would have to begin to be accrued in that budget and would have to be raised by that point in time. There was some question in the public comment about a a conflict of interest. And I appreciate the public commenter raising that issue. This is an important issue. And I did give thought to that. In this instance, the expenditure of the dollars, the payment of the dollars to President Corcoran is really the purview of this organization, and the expenditure of foundation dollars is the, when I by organization, I mean this board. We decide, not President Corcoran, what he gets paid. And if monies are to come from the foundation board and this board have to make those, approve those expenditures, not President Corcoran. So his responsibility is to raise as much money as he can. Our responsibility is to determine how that money gets spent. And if anyone,
just as a clarification on that, just to add to that, right? His incentive is, one of his incentives to receive that is to raise money. If he doesn't raise the money, he's not going to receive. I mean, that's how an incentive works. I think we intentionally set it up that way.
Okay, got it. And then my final comment, and then we can move on to, I think Trustee Reed was after me. For the goals and incentives, so for the interim contract, we were supposed to have a meeting to discuss and approve the goals we set out for Mr. Corcoran. That never happened. I'm going to first ask that we make sure that there is a presidential review committee that happens soon. I've asked a couple times for this to happen, to review these goals. But I did have one suggested addition that I think we're all on board of, because we've spoken about this before. Would it be possible for, I think it's 1, 2, 3, 4, the 6th bullet point on page 15 says increase enrollment growing to 1,200 by end of year 5. Is it possible to add the language without sacrificing academic standards overall? Because I think that's a slight change, but it's pretty crucial. And I think we're all on the same page about that language change.
So, two parts to your question. One was creating the committee, and certainly that's within the purview of Chair Jenks, but I support that. I think it's important that we, on a routine basis, evaluate the president. It would be strange for any institution not to do that. I did try to build some flexibility into the mechanism, and this goes partly to your second question as well, because my fear was that if we set goals today and they were static and they couldn't be amended, what we need 3 years from now, we may not be able to, as wise as this group may or may not be, we may not be able to look into that crystal ball and see that. So there is language in the agreement that permits modification of the goals or addition or subtraction to the goals. Obviously, it's got to come to this board for approval, or if this board delegates that to a committee. I'm certainly welcome to hear from the rest of the board, but what I would suggest we do is maybe approve the contract as drafted, but I agree with the comment that you made, and I think we need to look more closely as a group at those goals and work with President Corcoran to develop those performance goals as we go forward, and maybe reserve that to that more detailed, focused process.
Thank you.
If I might just make one point, if you look at the bullet immediately following the 1,200, it says to enrich academic programs and offerings. And so if you're enriching, you're not diminishing.
And Trustee Reed, I'm going to recognize you in 1 second. I just, Trustee Keenan, did you have any other questions or comments at this time?
No, that is it. Thank you.
I just, not to digress, but I just want to recognize Trustee Keenan as an exemplary New College student and someone that makes me proud to be on this board of trustees. In our public comment, a lot of folks have a propensity to say and act in a way that, in my opinion, is not necessarily becoming of a New College student. But Trustee Keenan, you serve as a model of an articulate, smart, and thoughtful person, and I appreciate all your questions and comments here.
Thank you.
Sorry for digressing. Trustee Reed.
Hi. So I have my comments and questions are in 2 parts. First, looking at the performance metrics. I share Trustee Keenan's concerns that those performance goals are very vague. And I do think it would be important to have something in there about maintaining the academic rigor and quality of our programs and our students. Enriching academic programs is not the same thing as the caliber of the students. Enriching academic programs is adding, not subtracting, areas of concentration. It's adding different master's programs that have been discussed. That is enrichment. But we need to, I think, to have something in there that focuses on the caliber of the students, because we saw this year not only a 24-point drop in our ratings, but a significant drop in terms of the GPAs and test scores of the admitted students. And I hope that that's not going to be the case going forward. With that in mind, I was glad to hear Trustee Cristaldi, you speak about the importance of both retaining the president, because I do think that it's important to see this as not a short-term contract. The previous president was ousted after just 18 months, and I think that that was unfortunate and led to a lot of the instability that we're now seeing in this program. So with that in mind, I don't understand why the contract is going back to last February. And especially given that we have now approved a foundation budget that allows for enough money to pay out what was expected in this calendar year for the presidential contract, it might be appropriate to start this contract in July 1 of this year, if you want to go back, and have it running the length of the fiscal calendar, so that these extra bonuses that the foundation is going to have to fundraise for fall due later. I think that would be appropriate. And finally,
go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt. I was going to address the first 2 points, but I got them in my mind. So go ahead. You can continue.
Just the last one. I think we have seen this year a really radical drop in retention for students. We only retained 27, we lost 27% of the returning cohort. The first year retention was the lowest in memory. I think it sets out here a goal of second year retention growing to 85, which is 10% more than it was a year ago in 5 years. I would think it would be appropriate to see that retention goal set a little earlier, right? And this is about tightening up these goals for the new president. We had a retention rate of 75% a year ago. It dropped to just under 65% this year. I would assume that we should be able to get over 75 and up to 85 in a shorter period of time than year 5. So maybe year 3 might make some sense.
Yes. So first off, very, very good points. Let me kind of maybe address them a little bit in turn. And the first and the last were really about setting the criteria in the agreement, which I really appreciate the feedback on. And I think we're on the same page on how we hone in on these things. One part that I forgot to mention, that's a bit of a nuance that I think gave me some comfort in this. The criteria that I stated in the agreement are not a bar after which President Corcoran would automatically get a payment. They are criteria that he must achieve to be considered by the board, but I did retain the portion of the contract that leaves the bonusing at the board's discretion. So what that does for us, and Trustee Keenan, this goes a little bit to your questions as well, is it's incumbent upon us on an annual basis, really, because we're going to be deciding incentive bonus on an annual basis, to clearly articulate our expectations within those categories of things and hold the president accountable for those items. What falls within a category, what falls within engage, I'm going to use an example, what falls within the category of engaging a highly qualified and engaged faculty, what that means on an annual basis is going to be up to this board to determine and articulate to the president. And then at the end of the year, we will be discussing whether the president met that goal and making a decision on it. So I did intentionally, I wouldn't say I intentionally made them to be vague, but I intended them to be broad, more categorical than an exact goal to hit, with the idea that we retain the discretion as a board on how to communicate what our expectations are and we as a board will decide whether or not the president has met those goals that we've set out. It would be bad for us not to clearly articulate those goals on an annual basis, because it does a disservice to the institution by not being clear on what our expectations are, and it does a disservice to the president in that regard. Your second comment was about the term, and I would note too that it's a very good question. Presuming that things aren't working out, or president finds something to do after this engagement, then the agreement would end in 5 years. There's also an implicit ability for us to negotiate an extension of that term, and if things are going well at that point, we would continue on. So the end date to me is a little less important at a point in time, because if it's going well, the end date's irrelevant. We're going to continue it until it's not going well. And if it isn't going well, if it ends, in February of I don't know, of 28, I guess it's 5 years from now, or August of 28 or October of 28 is probably a little less important. That at least was my thought process. I saw you, Trustee Reed, raise your hand again, so I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, no,
And then
happy to
Trustee
get that.
Caroline and Trustee Keenan, I'll recognize you in a moment. Go ahead, Trustee Reed, sorry.
So I guess what I'm hearing from this is that the board needs to be clear today and set out a commitment today that this board is going to have a committee that will meet to actually set these goals for the president. It seems to me unwise. I mean, if I would be uncomfortable signing a contract where the criteria upon which I would be evaluated for my work were so vague. So I think it would behoove this committee, this board, to set a very clear date by which there will be a committee set that puts some specifics in for the evaluation of the president for this coming year. At the moment, it has his bonus coming in, I believe, in February of this coming year. That doesn't give us a lot of time, and it doesn't give him any time to show any improvement on retention, right? Because we won't have had a full year of recruitment coming in. So I think it would be in the interest of President Corcoran for there to be some clarity on this before the contract is finalized. I do have one more other point, but can we agree that this committee has often said, we're going to meet, we will have a committee, we will take care of this. And unfortunately, with all the things on our plates, that doesn't happen. To wit, Trustee Spalding talked about having a meeting of the Strategic Planning Committee. I will say that our Academic and Student Affairs Committee has not met since June, and we were promised that it would meet. And there's a lot of things that good intentions fail us because we have so many things on our plates, right? So I think I would appreciate it if there was something stipulated that this is going to happen by a certain date, so that there is clarity on what this contract means and on what the criteria are for evaluating the success of our incoming president.
Yep. So I think that the compensation and criteria discussions could happen by the board as a whole, or it could happen by a committee. I'm not the parliamentarian of the group here, but my general understanding is that that's the case. It's certainly beyond my authority to designate a committee. So Chair Jenks would speak to the timing and the creation of a committee. And Chair Jenks, I'm not sure if you're prepared to speak to that today, but if you have any thoughts on it.
I'll coordinate with counsel for the college, and we'll come up with a plan and a schedule.
Is it? And
sorry, can I make a comment on that real quick while we're on this point?
Trustee Spalding.
This notion of goals, I didn't read the discussion in the contract to be definitive. Indeed, I note that there's a clause in that in the paragraph right before it that the board may also request that Corcoran revise and create additional goals from time to time, which is say that it kind of keeps us in the driver's seat. Because to be perfectly honest, I do not disagree. I would say probably I do agree that some sort of goal, making sure that GPA or ACT score, however we want to define it, yeah, that's important. I don't disagree with that at all. But I didn't read the language here to be that's it, folks. And the other thing, and this is, I guess, a question for you, Trustee Castaldi, is the retention bonus, I think, does not become an issue until the third year, which say this next February, we're not at that point.
On that question, I think the answer is that it begins to accrue, Trustee Spalding, but it's not a payment issue until year 3.
Which means it's not till year 3 that he would get such an incentive, which means we would make goals to make that at point at year 3.
It's a good question. I understand. There's 2 components to it. And sorry if I haven't been clear to date on this point. So in section 8B, there's an annual incentive compensation bonus, which is discretionary on the part of the board, set on these criteria that, again, I intended to be organic, because my concern was if we're too super specific, like grow enrollment to 1,200, if the president were to accomplish that after year 1, hypothetically, does that mean that he gets a bonus in year 2 and year 3 and year 4 for doing nothing else, right? That wouldn't make sense. We would change the criteria. So there's the $200,000 bonus a year. Formerly, it was set as a percentage of comp, but we set it as a number. It's up to that amount. So we can give 0, we could give $1, we could give 200,000, and it's based on that criteria. And then secondly, there's a retention bonus, separate and distinct from the incentive bonus, which is paid based on his continued performance at the institution. If he leaves the institution for any reason, other than for any reason, I believe, then he loses that retention bonus. Trustee Reed, I see you had your hand up again. Sorry.
Okay, so just to clarify, there are actually 2 $200,000 items in this contract. One is a performance bonus, and that is dealt with in this coming February, because that's at the end of year 1 of the contract. And then there is a retention bonus. So there's $200,000 that the foundation may have to come up with in February above and beyond the salary. And then there's $200,000 that is deferred, correct? So we have $400,000 at play here, not $200,000.
Yeah, so let me re-explain and be clear. On an annual basis for the first 3 years, each year there's an incentive bonus payment that at the discretion of the board could give up to $200,000. That is not, in essence, a new payment. In his prior contract, it was stated as a percentage. This might be $10,000 or $20,000 more, but it's a flat number as opposed to a percentage. But the payment was there. I presume that the foundation understood that they had that liability under the other contract. That again could be up to $200,000. It could be less than $200,000. It's decided on an annual basis each year during the term of the contract, based on the president's performance as measured against those categories of things that we will take and set criteria on. Separate from that, sorry, let me just finish here. Separate from that, there's a retention bonus. The way the retention bonus works is in each of the first 3 years, there's a $200,000 a year accrual, meaning that you vest in it, but you don't get paid unless you're here on the 3rd year, on the beginning of the 3rd year. So if you leave 2.5 years into the contract, you get 0. If you're here on the 3rd year of the contract, you get $200,000 a year times 3. For the final 2 years of the contract, the annual amount that gets accrued goes down by half to $100,000 each year. So it's an additional $200,000 on year 5 for years 4 and 5 accrued. If you're not here on the beginning, at the end of the contract, you don't get it. If you are, you do get it. I'm sorry, Trustee Reed, I did not mean to.
Trustee Cristaldi, if I may, but.
Yes, sir.
And I want to clarify, because I'm listening to you all, I want to clarify one thing. The performance bonus, the way it's written, and frankly, to the candidate's detriment, is purely discretionary. And which means that criteria or not, the board's going to decide whether they pay $1 or $200,000. It's a truly discretionary bonus, and it's up to the Board of Trustees to decide whether or not it has been earned or a portion of it has been earned.
And that's what we did in the interim agreement, had it purely discretionary. And again, my judgment was it doesn't help align the goals of the institution with the actions of the president to wait until the end of the year and just have a discussion of, do we think the president did a good job or not? It helps to begin to articulate what behaviors we expect and we measure success by. So this was intended to be kind of an initial articulation of those, with the idea that we would, as a board or as a committee, more clearly articulate within these categories things that we wanted and that we would judge the president on an annual basis, and to make that determination so that it's clearly communicated in the beginning. The president understands what the expectations are, and we have a guidepost at the end of the year where we're measuring performance.
So on that same point, Trustee Casarelli, how does this compare to the interim contract in terms of its workings? My read on the difference between the payout, including those annual bonuses from the interim to here, was only about $78,000 difference. You're just doing it differently. Is that am I reading that correctly?
We're talking about the incentive bonus
as opposed to the retention bonus.
So there was no retention bonus in the interim agreement, and the incentive bonus in the interim agreement was set as a percentage of comp. It was 15% of compensation, so 15% of $699. Here I rounded it to a number, and then I added the retention bonus concept again to help enforce the stability and give.
Right. So, but my point is, the incentive bonus is not as large of an addition to the interim contract, which we've previously approved, as seems to be the case. You just turned it into a number rather than a percentage. The retention bonus is a very different thing, but that's based on us focusing on these goals, which I'd like to sharpen, and is actually a incentive to keep him here in place longer, which we will decide later. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Actually, I think that the goals are linked to the performance bonus, which was 15% or $105,000 and is now being increased to $200,000 without any clarity in the criteria. The retention bonus is another thing, and it's an additional $200,000. And let's also remember that there is also another $100,000 of deferred compensation as well, right? So just to keep this all in mind, there's a lot of numbers here. I do think I would make an amendment that the board will convene a committee to clarify and set clear criteria for the evaluation of the president. And I think that is something the president should get to know what he's actually going to be evaluated on. It shouldn't be vague. And I think it's in our fiduciary responsibility to insist that that's laid out clearly at this point.
Yeah, so if you all refer back to the summary document that was provided to the board attached to the contract, there's a financial summary, a list of all the items there. I think as Trustee Reed has articulated is how I've articulated it as well. So I don't want to kind of keep rehashing the same thing over again. Trustee Reed, I think what you're suggesting is a board function. You know, it's a responsibility of the board to either delegate to the committee or to itself evaluate and articulate the criteria. My instinct is it's not something we want to put in the contract, because if we put that in the contract and we fail to do it, then President Corcoran's going to have a cause of action for us for breach of contract. It's really part of our responsibility. And Chair Jenks, I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but if I understood you correctly, you are going to give thought to whether it's a full board or a committee, and give thought to a deadline or a date for us to do that, and communicate that out to the board. That's a question.
So I'll absolutely do that, and do that in consultation with council. I would just note that trustees Bauerlein and trustee Anderson had hands up. So.
Okay, Trustee Bauerlein, I did acknowledge you, and I failed to call upon you, sir. I apologize. Let me give you an opportunity to speak.
If I can please, when I started, I said that I had 2 questions. So I just want a confirmation you will come back to me for the other. And also, just the motion I made would be the amendment I made would be an amendment to our motion to approve. It's not actually an amendment to the language of the contract.
Okay, thank you, Trustee Reed. I respectfully have given you a lot of time. I will come back to you, but let me let some of the other trustees speak, please. Trustee Bauerlein.
A general question, I think, that is related. In our periodic evaluations of the president, is a board, are the criteria that a board applies limited to what is explicitly stated in the performance measures, the goals of a contract?
In this case, it's an excellent question. In this case, no, for 2 reasons. One, because the contract itself recognizes that there may be other criteria that the board and the president may determine. And 2, because the payment of the bonus is within the discretion of the board. So the board can decide to weight certain things more heavily than it weights other things. And again, my suggestion was that through committee or the board, it would be unfair to the institution and unfair to the president for us to do that at the end of the year after everything's happened, and just say, well, president should have focused a little more on item 1 and not item 2. It's our responsibility to communicate that. But the way this contract works, the answer to your question is in the negative, because it provides a fluid organic mechanism for us to amend and clarify and specify and change those. And it also provides the discretion on the part of the board to weight them and decide how much payout is going to be associated with them. I'm going to come back to Trustee Reed in a second, but let me just ask, does anybody else have any other questions before I seeing none? Trustee Reed, I think you you had a question, but one of the things that you mentioned was that you made a motion, if I understood it correctly, it was to amend the motion that and I don't mean to put words in your mouth, I'm just trying to articulate it, and you can tell me if I'm right or wrong here. The motion, the amendment would be to adopt the contract as presented, and to create a committee that would focus on setting criteria and evaluating the president. I have a question for Mr. Galvano. And sir, if you don't know this, it's okay, but I have a question at least as to whether our governing documents vest that in the full board or in the chair, and whether that amendment would be well received or not.
So the amendment, I understand it the way you understand it, is essentially a separate subject matter. It's not, we're dealing with the contract itself. I will point out that the contract says the board may establish a committee to deal with it, or the board can do it itself. Establishing that committee and giving an assignment would be a separate independent motion.
So Trustee Reed, there's some rule of parliamentary procedure about combining multiple subjects into a motion. So I don't know whether this is volatile of that or not, but I'm not unreceptive to what you're suggesting. And I think Chair Jenks is receptive to it. Again, Chair Jenks, I don't mean to speak for you, but maybe we have a separate motion after we resolve this motion, which is just to create a committee that would, and again, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but create a presidential review committee that would be appointed by the chair and would handle matters of setting, making recommendations on bonusing.
Yes, I agree.
And that would meet by early December. I think we have to have a specific, I'm okay with moving that to later, but I think there needs to be a specific date by which the committee will have met and come back to this board with its recommendations, because otherwise we'll be in February before we know it.
So let's do this because I'm afraid of conflating kind of subject matters, and I understand that. Would you withdraw your motion to amend
I'm okay
and
with
then?
doing that later.
Thank you.
But I do have one other amendment.
Yes.
So my other point, I move to amend that point 15 be stricken, that the question of a faculty appointment for the president be deferred to some subsequent time. President Corcoran brings a lot of experience in terms of relations with Tallahassee, and I do believe that he was hired specifically because of his ability to manage those important relations, but I do not believe he has any teaching experience. And so I believe quite strongly that point 15 on faculty appointment ought to be struck, and I make that motion.
I'll second that motion. And
sorry, Trustee Keenan, go ahead.
I was gonna second that motion, and then maybe what we can do is call the vote on this motion, then the contract, and a new business. We set timelines for the Presidential Evaluation Committee and the other committees, if that's possible.
Yeah. So let me just make a comment on that.
Make a point on the last issue, and I know we have a proper motion at this time and a proper second. There is an existing standing committee I was just made aware of that would fulfill those duties, so it's now a question of meaning. So I'm conflating issues, but I didn't want to lose that thought. So at this point, there's a motion and a proper second.
Yep, thank you, sir. So I would just want to comment on that section 15. I'll note for the board before we call that question that I did not set any particular salary there. And I will tell you that I did give thought to that. And being a lawyer and having gone to law school, most law professors that I had they have law degrees, not just law degrees, but a law degree as an advanced degree. And in fact, I think it's unusual for a law professor to have more than a JD. And I thought that President Corcoran is very qualified to teach a class on politics and a class on government and things like that. That would be something that 5 years from now, the new president would decide and determine, and certainly it would have to happen through the processes for determining what courses are approved and comply with all of our regulations at New College of Florida and the Board of Governors regulations. So that's why I felt comfortable with it. But we've got a motion and a second on the floor. Let me ask and this motion is Trustee Reed's
question.
Yes, sir.
Just on clarification, am I correct? It says that he would be appointed as a NCF faculty member, but it doesn't say anything there about term or status.
That's correct, sir.
Does that mean essentially it's you're appointed to teach, but by implication there has to be some term, but it's not in ipso facto a tenured full-time faculty?
It's definitely
that's to
not
be later.
It's definitely not tenured, and it would be determined at the time as to the duration.
So it's not making a permanent appointment.
That's
at this time.
Trustee Cristaldi, Chair, I'd be fine with that language being struck. I have no issue with it.
We've got a motion and a second on the floor, and the motion is Trustee Reed's motion to strike section 15, which deals with the faculty appointment at the end of the term. Let me ask if.
And what was interim Corcoran's comment? I didn't hear it.
I believe that he said that he would be fine either way. If we decided to strike that out of the agreement, he would be fine either way. President Corcoran, is that a fair characterization of your comment?
Yes, I'd be fine with the motion passing.
Let me ask Christy to do a roll call vote, as I think it would be easier to understand. So the motion is to eliminate section 15.
Trustee Anderson,
No.
trustee Bauerlein,
No.
trustee Carp,
No.
trustee Keenan,
Yes.
trustee Kessler,
He's on mute, but I saw his lips say no. Trustee Kessler, if that's wrong,
Okay.
but
trustee Reed,
You
Yeah.
read lips very well, trustee Cristaldi. Yeah, that was a no.
trustee Rufo,
No.
trustee Spalding,
No.
chair Jinks,
No.
vice chair Cristaldi.
no.
Motion, motion fails, sorry.
Mr. Galvano, I believe that we've got a motion and a second on, I believe the motion is to approve the contract as presented. Was there any other pending motion or procedural reason why I can't call that question?
Mr. Trustee Cristaldi, trustee Anderson had his hand up and then it went down. I'm sorry.
I had it raised a while ago just to call the question. We've been going in circles. It's time to just vote. Let's just do it.
You're correct. You're now in a posture to call the question.
Okay.
Okay.
So the
Trustee
question,
Anderson,
Yes.
trustee Bauerlein,
Yes.
trustee Carp,
Yes.
trustee Keenan,
No.
trustee Kessler,
Yes.
trustee Reed,
No.
trustee Rufo,
Yes.
trustee Spalding,
Yes.
chair Jinks,
Yes.
vice chair Cristaldi.
yes.
Motion passes.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I think that concludes my report. And I appreciate, I want to just thank everybody for the opportunity to present here today. I know that these are very difficult decisions to make, and I know that not everybody agrees on every issue here, but I appreciate the professionalism and discussion, and I hope that we can all come together and support the institution in a unified way as we go forward here and put this agreement in this chapter behind us. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, trustee Cristaldi. We appreciate so much the work that you've done. I appreciate all the work of the new college staff and the legal counsel and of the trustees participating in this. I note we have about 2 minutes left.
And I think sorry, Madam Chair, I don't mean to, trustee Reed, you were wanted to make a motion relative to the committee. I think Mr. Galvano spoke to the fact that there may already be an existing committee. So
there is an existing committee and I'm the chair of that. So we will take up the process of getting set up to do the review. I just wanted to see if we had time to go back to the campus master plan, and what the proposal was just to eliminate the current language in 3-15101 of chapter 3 administrative affairs of New College, and all it says now is reserved, so that we would be reserving to put in language on the campus master plan. Is Council Brickhouse still available?
Yes, Chair.
Is that accurate?
Madam Chair,
Yes.
you need a motion to untable it with second, not debatable, and then you've got it back out.
Do we have time to do that now?
Sorry, I have a motion that might help resolve this. Could I motion that we send this to the strategic planning committee so all of this discussion can happen then, and they give us a recommendation?
Second.
Because we don't have time
Make
to.
that motion, I mean,
Why don't we just leave it tabled? If we
I
don't,
mean,
what is the, I guess this is a question for those on the main campus. What is the necessity and timing of this?
I think Mr. Galvano said it's not completely urgent. So maybe we just push this to a committee who can have a full discussion when that committee can convene.
I'd be comfortable.
Yeah, I don't.
Madam Chair, to that committee.
I'm fine tabling it and we can bring it back. I don't think it needs to go to a committee. It's just an an amendment to our administrative affairs section of the code and has a reservation clause so that we could go back and put in a new campus master plan, if I understand correctly what Council Brickhouse was trying to achieve here, but I'm fine tabling this and we can bring it up at the next board meeting.
Okay.
Trustee
It
Galvano,
is
does,
tabled, Madam Chair.
yeah,
It is.
pardon me?
It
Okay.
is tabled currently.
Currently
sorry.
tabled. Right.
If
So
you leave it
then
on
I
the
have,
table and adjourn, then it stays there until.
I'm just worried about time right now.
Yeah. So
I have a,
with
Being noon.
We, Mr. Galvano, we do have a motion and a second on the floor, unless it's withdrawn.
I can withdraw it, and I have another motion that we can hopefully quickly do to hopefully resolve all of our discussions, if that's all right.
is that
May
coming
I?
under new business?
Yes.
Trustee, I would need council to tell me that.
Yes,
Wow.
you recognize your trustee, James, Chair James.
Under new business.
Yes.
Okay, Trustee Keenan.
So can I please propose a motion that in the next 4 months, which I think is a reasonable amount of time, we have the strategic planning committee, the presidential review committee, and I think the student affairs committee meet. If 4 months is not enough time or you need more, I just think we need some sort of motion to make sure this happens because we've been asking for this for a couple months now.
So Trustee Keenan, the motion is to direct the chairs of those committees to hold a meeting in the next 4 months.
Yes, exactly.
It's a second.
I'm not sure who the respective chairs of those committees are, but does anyone see a problem with that?
No.
I'll second the motion.
All
I
those
can
in
make-
favor?
Can I make
Aye.
a friendly amendment? That it should be within 2 months, because I think 4 is a little too long. Some of these committees we've been asking to meet for the past 3 months.
Could it be maybe end of January? I think that's about 3 months or so.
I have a concern. I have a concern I'd like to raise.
This is driving the agenda here. I think the chairman should determine that. The voice of the board is they should meet within a very reasonable time of 4 months. But I mean, to force them to meet in a situation where you guys are just trying to drive the agenda, I just object to that.
I also object. I think that this is a new business item or a business item where the vote of the board should be significant. It should be substantial. It should be a major decision. The idea that we are going to be now micromanaging the schedules that should be run independently strikes me as a bad precedent, and also strikes me as bogging down this board, which is tackling big issues with minor procedural issues. And furthermore, I would say should be noted that the 2 trustees who voted against the interim president, against the permanent president, and now against the contract, that should be taken into account. Their sentiments should be taken into account, and I would not award them extra deference. It strikes me as part of a pattern of trying to delay, trying to obfuscate, trying to bog down the board. And so I would be wholeheartedly against this.
So
thank you, Trustee. Yep, stop. So I'll have comment from Ron Cristaldi, and then I will have the last word. Go ahead, Trustee Cristaldi, please.
So let me just ask Trustee Keenan first, would you maintain the original motion on 4 months?
Yes.
Trustee Rufo, your comments are well taken. My seconding of this motion, I would say, is not to set any kind of precedent. I'd like the record to be clear on that, but just to underscore the importance of those committees and the work those committees are doing. I think, a 4-month time frame seems reasonable. And again, I'm seconding the motion in the vein of a new era of collaboration and working together and healing here. So appreciate if folks do vote no for it, but would ask everybody to just consider. I think it's a reasonable time frame. I did ask the chairs here if they thought it was a reasonable time frame, and I got nods of yes from everyone. So Trustee Jenks, if you wouldn't mind, maybe just call the question on that motion in second.
I was just going to say that I want the chairs of the committees to reach out to Christy Fitzpatrick, who coordinates the meetings and set up meetings for each committee in due course as we can do it and do it, you know, as efficiently as soon as possible. I don't believe that a motion is needed for that. I'm asking you to do that now as chairs, and we can address that, you know, off the meeting. Yes.
I think it's also part of the building of general trust that items like these don't require a vote. They're simply done in good faith, in a spirit of collaboration. If those committee chairs here could just verbally say, yeah, I intend to do that, I plan to do that, that strikes me as a much better solution than setting the precedent that we're, you know, voting on schedules for regular board meetings or subcommittee meetings rather.
Madam Chair, since we have a motion and a second, I'll go ahead and call the roll for this. The question's been called. So trustee Anderson,
No.
trustee Bauerlein,
No.
trustee Carp,
Yes.
trustee Keenan,
Yes.
trustee Kessler,
No.
trustee Reed,
Yes.
trustee Rupo,
No.
trustee Spalding,
In principle, no, but I'm happy to have a meeting as a chair.
Chair Jinks,
No.
Vice Chair Cristaldi.
Yes.
Motion fails.
Okay, so we have exhausted our time. We will have the contract processed. I appreciate everybody's attendance and cooperation. And again, the chairs of the committees, please get with Ms. Fitzpatrick as soon as possible. And I will review who's on the committees again. I know we've had a couple of trustee changes and we're short a trustee pending reappointment, I believe, through the Board of Governors. So I appreciate everybody's hard work, and we will get those subcommittee meetings scheduled. And I guess that's it. Are we done, council? Can we go?
You move to adjourn and
Oh.
adjourn.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
Yep.
So
Second?
Second.
Great. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, we're adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
Now.